Tonight, Donald Trump prepares to bring in huge new tariffs. The White House is warning the days of the US being ripped off are over. Keir Starmer's been telling our political editor, Beth Rigby, that businesses here in the UK don't want a knee-jerk response. As Team Trump are tonight claiming tomorrow will go down as one of the most important days in modern American history. Also tonight, the UK takes stronger action against Russia, accusing the Kremlin of unacceptable threats to the UK's national security. Plus, disabled, autistic and homeless. We've got a special report on what happens when those with complex needs come into contact with the social care system. And Labour MPs have been told they need to get on YouTube and TikTok to help battle against the power of the algorithm. Is it a good idea? Our political influencers tonight, Ed Vaizey and Caroline Flint, will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening, and welcome to our new studio set. Big desk to reflect the big news agenda. Let me know what you think of it. Now, in just over an hour's time, Donald Trump is expected to announce a whole raft of tariffs that are thought to affect every country, including the UK. They'll hit the British economy, and Keir Starmer says nobody welcomes tariffs. But let's just say that message isn't exactly registering with the US.
In a sense, it's a rebirth of a country, because how we could have afforded to do what we did, we help everybody, and they don't help us. The term I like best probably is the liberation of America.
So I guess when Donald Trump says his favourite word is tariffs, we really should believe him. So what should Keir Starmer do? Now, he's been trying to maintain a good relationship with the US, and there are still hopes, of course, of a trade deal, or to give it its formal title, a US-UK economic prosperity deal. But not everyone is taking the same approach. Take Canada's Mark Carney, for example.
We will fight the US tariffs with retaliatory trade actions of our own that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada.
Now, we don't know which approach is going to work the best. It's too early to tell. But Keir Starmer will be hoping his softly tactics will work, frankly, because he needs them to. The government is walking a very narrow economic tightrope. Last week, Labour made the painful decision to cut benefits in order to preserve that headroom needed to keep within the fiscal rules. But just listen to what the budget watchdog said earlier today, what tariffs could do to that all-important headroom.
If tariffs at 20–25% were put on the UK and maintained for 5 years, our assessment of what that does is that it will knock out all the headroom that the government currently has.
Not just some of the headroom, knock out all of the headroom. Let's hope that trade deal comes off. With our first report tonight, here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Daily life getting a bit more difficult as millions of us woke up to rising household bills, be it our council tax, energy costs, or the price we pay for our water. The Prime Minister insisting he gets it.
I think for most people, they would say the cost of living crisis is ongoing and they feel the pressure financially. That's why it's so important that we make good on our pledge that people would feel better off. And the national living wage going up today by an average of £1,400 is going to affect millions of people. So I'm not denying there are
you acknowledge people are going to be feeling it.
I acknowledge that with bills coming in, people see that rise, and that is a pressure.
The PM here with bank workers in London to highlight rising wages.
Is that right? Yeah. Oh, that's really good.
But what isn't good? Incoming Trump tariffs, which brings this Prime Minister a serious economic problem. The OBR budget watchdog today warning tariffs could wipe out the Chancellor's financial headroom in the long term. People are going to be worse off when Trump's tariffs come into effect, won't they?
Well, look, I don't think anybody wants to see tariffs.
But you acknowledge we are going to get them.
Well, look, we're working hard on an economic deal, which we've made rapid progress on. And I hope we can make really speedy resolutions on. But look, the likelihood is there will be tariffs.
On Donald Trump, you have worked so hard with him. You have pulled your punches, you haven't criticised him publicly, and now this. Do you feel played by him?
The US is our closest ally. Obviously, we are discussing economic deals. We're well advanced on. These would normally take months or years, and in a matter of weeks, we've got well advanced in those discussions.
Tariffs beyond the PM's control, but tax on business is his choice. The controversial hike in national insurance for employers now kicking in, and the Conservatives kicking Labour over it.
What?
But Badenoch's party with brand problems of its own. Do you acknowledge that the cost of living crisis did start under the former Conservative government, that Liz Truss's mini-budget destroyed your party's reputation on economic credibility? How can you now turn around your own reputation on the economy? And do you think the public are listening to you?
Our reputation was not built in the last few years. It was built over many decades, I would say centuries. The Conservative Party is the party of business. Rishi Sunak was the last Prime Minister, and he left Keir Starmer an economy that was the fastest growing in the G7. All of that is gone.
Just quickly on tariffs, everything you've said today seems to chime with what the Prime Minister is actually trying to do, i.e. no retaliatory tariffs immediately, trying at pace to arrange this economic deal. So on this at least, you're shoulder to shoulder with him and agree with him.
If the Prime Minister does not want to put retaliatory tariffs on, I think that's excellent. That is the right thing to do. Where he does the right thing, we will agree.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good news story, isn't it?
The PM keen to plug his government's action on the national living wage, but with household finances still a big worry for many and a mountain of economic hurdles ahead, this PM with little to cheer. Beth Rigby, Sky News, London.
Well, ahead of Donald Trump's imminent announcement on tariffs, the White House have been talking pretty tough. Our US correspondent Mark Stone joins us now from Washington. What have they been saying?
Well, trust Donald Trump, effectively. He is a successful businessman. There's nothing to worry about. Yeah, the markets, Wall Street might go up and down a little bit, but that's a point in time, so they say, and Wall Street is not Main Street. And that, you know, obviously the focus is Americans, how Americans will feel about potentially prices rising, because if you walk into any old branch of Walmart, you will discover that most of the products there are made abroad, and therefore naturally we can assume that they will cost more once these tariffs come into place. So reporters to Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, asking her, you know, are Americans, is Donald Trump prepared for the fact that Americans will find everything that bit more expensive? She kind of dodged the question and said, look, you just got to trust Donald Trump. Have a listen.
Too many foreign countries have their markets closed to our exports. This is fundamentally unfair. The lack of reciprocity contributes to our large and persistent annual trade deficit that's gutted our industries and hollowed out key workforces. But those days of America, beginning tomorrow, being ripped off are over. American workers and businesses will be put first under President Trump, just as he promised on the campaign trail. The president's historic action tomorrow will improve American competitiveness in every area of industry.
And Mark, I guess the UK have been hoping that there could be some kind of exemption, some kind of opt-out for the UK, but no chance of that.
Not at the moment, although we know that Donald Trump and Keir Starmer spoke on Sunday, that there is some chat of another call sometime soon in the next 48 hours. Maybe we will see. A couple of points, Sophie. I think we should look at this Liberation Day, as Donald Trump is calling it, and it will have all the fanfare that comes with that sort of catchy headline. There will be a Rose Garden moment. All the cabinet will be here tomorrow as he announces these tariffs. But I think we should look at it almost as the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. Yes, we may at the end of the day tomorrow see perhaps blanket tariffs across the whole world, 20% or whatever, on everything coming into the United States. But that will be I think, a start point, a point from which individual countries, the UK absolutely wanting to be as close to the front of the line as possible, then trying to negotiate their way out of whatever Donald Trump's put in place. So the beginning of a negotiation. And why is Donald Trump framing it like this? Well, so he can be seen as the one calling the shots. I slapped down all these tariffs, and then all these countries came to me and begged for some sort of a carve out, which he will perhaps give down the line. We will see. That's the first point. The second point to make is that we just don't know what Donald Trump is going to do tomorrow. And I think that's extraordinary. I don't just mean us, the media. Governments around the world have no idea quite what Donald Trump is going to announce, what he's going to put in place. Will it be a blanket tariff? Will he treat the European Union as one bloc or lots of individual countries? What will he do for the UK, which has a much smaller deficit with the US? It's incredibly hard to negotiate when you don't know what Donald Trump's going to put in place. It's also very hard to negotiate when ultimately one man will make the decision, and that is Donald Trump. And so it's got to be done at leader-to-leader level. That's why Keir Starmer spoke to him on Sunday. That's why he wants to speak to him again as soon as possible. So very, very hard. It's easier for diplomats here to have negotiations with people under Donald Trump, but ultimately it's kind of a hypothetical negotiation because they don't quite know, even the people within the White House don't know what Donald Trump is going to opt to do. So that's really, really tricky. The last point I'd make, Sophie, is that I think what will be happening in Downing Street and what has been happening over the past few weeks is that they're trying to find any area where they can throw a bone to Donald Trump and say, look, what about this area? Maybe we can do this to try and placate the president. And that's been happening. Keir Starmer is right in saying, as he did to Beth, that the negotiations that have been going on behind the scenes have actually put Britain in a pretty good place and have moved the conversation at a very fast pace. Stuff that would normally take months, maybe years to negotiate in terms of trade, have been discussed at fast pace. It's just that it's not really got anywhere yet. So I would watch things like cars. At the moment, 10% on cars, American cars coming into the UK. Maybe that's an area where the Brits can say to the Americans, OK, we'll reduce that because we're no longer aligned to Brussels. We can reduce that by a lot. So, you know, by all means, knock yourself out. Sell American cars in the UK. It's another question, incidentally, whether British people would want to buy massive gas-guzzling American cars. But, you know, maybe that's an area that can appeal to Donald Trump. But ultimately, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Mark. An awful lot to pick up there with our next guest, actually, the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. Thanks very much for being with us. As Mark was saying, so many different things to talk about today. But first, just very simply, what impact will tariffs from the US have on the UK?
Well, we obviously want to avoid tariffs, so that's why we've been negotiating so intensively in recent weeks to try and get an economic deal. You know, those negotiations began after the Prime Minister visited.
The question is, what impact will tariffs have on the UK?
Well, it's still hypothetical at this stage because the President hasn't made any announcements. We're obviously expecting announcements tomorrow. We expect them to apply to the UK as with other countries, and we're obviously preparing for all eventualities of what might happen. But you know, let's see what happens tomorrow. He hasn't made the announcements yet.
I totally appreciate that. But you can still talk in broad terms about what impact tariffs would have on the UK. What impact would it have?
Well, we're very clear that we want a free trade relationship with the US.
I can talk about that in a minute, but I always find when politicians say, I'm very clear, I don't find it very clear at all. What impact will tariffs have on the UK?
Well, I'm not going to go down the route of speculating because it is hypothetical. Well, it is hypothetical because we don't know what the President is going to announce tomorrow. You know, what we need to focus on is getting our economic deal.
It will make it more expensive for businesses to trade with the US, right?
Well, I'm very clear. We don't want tariffs. We don't want a trade war.
Well, why don't you want tariffs? You say you don't want tariffs. If you say you don't want tariffs, you must know what their impact would be.
Well, because we think it's in the best interests of British businesses to have free trade, to have an open economy, to make sure that we haven't got those extra.
I mean, I know this sounds like a really obvious question, but I'm very aware that we talk about all these things, tariffs, trade deals, without being clear about why we're talking about them. So this is the chance just to be clear to people what impact will tariffs... It's not a trick question. What impact will tariffs have on the UK?
Yeah, well, tariffs means that when we export things to the US, there is a tariff, there's an extra charge placed on them. We don't want that to happen because we want to make it easy for British businesses to export and to trade with the US in particular as one of our key allies, our closest ally when it comes to the economy,
so it'd be bad for
as well as all the
that's
other.
What you're saying. It'd be bad for British
businesses want a deal. It's in the best interests of businesses to get that deal. Businesses are telling us that. When businesses hear some of the speculation in the media, some of the rumours, and we then talk to businesses about what they need, they say, we want a deal. And that's why we're saying, OK, look, we're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction. We're going to be cool-headed and pragmatic. We're going to do everything we can to get that deal, because that's what British businesses are telling us they want.
I am slightly intrigued as to why you won't just say that it would be bad for business, but look, I get it. How quickly do you think you could get a trade deal in place with the US then?
Well, I'm definitely not going to put a time scale on it because we haven't even had the announcement made by the president yet, which he's going to make tomorrow, and we'll see what comes out from that. What we're doing is negotiating intensively to get that economic deal. And as your correspondent said just there, tomorrow is not the end of that process. So if there are tariffs announced tomorrow and if they affect the UK as with other countries, then our intensive negotiation to get a deal will continue because that's what businesses want to see happen.
Have tech companies been discussed as part of those trade talks?
Well, I'm not sitting there in the trade talks, so I can't give a running commentary on what is or isn't being discussed. But I know that the idea about having these discussions is to try and come to an economic deal, which is in our interests, and in the US's. You meet some of their concerns and their demands as well, because it is ultimately a deal.
Can you guarantee that the digital services tax won't be reduced?
Well, look, I say I'm not going to give a running commentary on what's happening in terms of those negotiations.
You have ruled out other things, or Jonathan Reynolds said this morning that he was not aware of certain things being discussed, but you can't say that about tech companies.
Well, like I say, I'm not going to give a running commentary.
A lot of people would believe that probably means tech companies have been discussed as part of these talks.
I can tell you very clearly what the principle is, in terms of businesses paying their fair share. The Chancellor's said that as well, that businesses, including those in the digital sector, should pay their fair share. But beyond that, I'm not going to give a running commentary on what's being discussed in the negotiations.
You see, the reason I'm talking about tech companies is because I feel that there is a wider conversation that people are having right now about tech companies, about toxic material online. Keir Starmer has been part of it, right? He asked the makers of adolescence into number 10. But you're not banning phones in schools. You're not ruling out reducing a digital services tax. You're not saying that the tech companies aren't part of the trade talks. Can you understand why some might be worried that you're effectively going soft on the tech companies in order to try and placate Donald Trump and get that trade deal through?
I can understand that people are concerned about some of the impact that technology is having, particularly on young people. I mean, I've seen adolescents, as many of us have recently. I know it from people, relatives and so on in my own life, about the impact that technology can have on them. So I think we're very alive to these issues. What we need to do is work out what the right response is. As a government, we don't go for sort of knee-jerk responses. We're saying, right, what is the right response to these issues that we're facing? What will actually deliver change? And if you look at the Prime Minister setting out his plan for change, it's very focused on what will actually make a difference in people's lives. And that applies to our key priorities in terms of economic growth and making people better off. But it applies across the board in terms of having meaningful change that actually improves people's lives.
And then can I just ask finally as well, just give me an update on the Chagos Islands. There's been reports that the US has effectively signed off on the UK's proposals. What's happened?
Well, again, I can't give a timescale or a sort of running commentary on that, but we know that the President has indicated he's sympathetic toward the deal, and we know that having that deal secured would be in the interests of the UK and the US in terms of national security and making sure that's stable for the future.
OK, thank you very much indeed. James Murray speaking to us there on the Politics Hub. Thank you. Well, of course, the latest on those trade tariffs is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We're going to have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and author Christina Patterson and also the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. An awful lot to discuss there, not least, of course, the latest that this man decides to do. Donald Trump, we've heard him there talking about a liberation day for the United States, something that, of course, is going to have a major impact on the UK, but also other countries around the world too. Speaking to James Murray there, it seemed pretty clear that those talks are continuing. They're hoping to get that trade deal over the line. Right, let's bring in our duo of the evening, shall we? We're joined by the former Conservative Culture Minister, Lord Vaizey. You OK there in a chair? You all right?
There's something wrong with this chair. Look at that. What's going on with this chair?
Mine's OK.
It's like a booby-trapped chair.
It's that April Fool's little present for you.
Make the Tory look like an idiot chair.
Vaizey, former Labour Housing Minister Caroline Flint on the good chair.
Yeah, hold on to me.
You'll be all right. Just keep upright.
Yeah,
We've also got our political editor, Beth Rigby, with us as well. All going swimmingly with the new studio. You can see just a couple of chair teething arrows, but we're all good. Right, let's talk about the very serious issue of Trump tariffs. Beth, what did you make of what James Murray was saying, what Keir Starmer said earlier?
Well, look, I mean, you tried your best to try and extricate some details about what's going on behind the scenes, but there are kind of lines to take on this, and government ministers not going beyond it. Look, you know, for Trump, this is Liberation Day. For the UK government, it's an absolute nightmare, quite simply because there was a hope that there would be an exemption from these tariffs. Keir Starmer went to the White House, had favourable soundings from President Trump. As you know, as ministers talk about often, we don't have a trade deficit with the US. We're not on his bad actors list for that, but it doesn't seem that there's going to be a carve-out, and actually the Prime Minister finally kind of publicly acknowledging that today, saying we're going to be hit by tariffs. So, look, this is a massive economic problem for the government. The OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is like the budget watchdog, the independent forecaster, said today that if the UK is hit with tariffs of 20 or 25%, it will wipe out the Chancellor's headroom. That's the surplus she has between spending and tax receipts by the end of the Parliament. So it will have a real economic impact, and it will force the government into having to make further decisions, potentially about tax rises or deeper spending cuts, or perhaps even more borrowing, although Rachel Reeves does not seem to be movable on that. But all of them, the point being, are bad options. So where are they now? I think what was clear from talking to the Prime Minister today is, and he said it himself, I don't want a knee-jerk reaction. That was his words. Kemi Badenoch actually backing him up on that, saying retaliatory tariffs, even if the EU do that or Canada look to do that, is not what our government want to do, but at the same time they need at pace this economic deal. And as you were saying to James Murray, all of the options are politically quite difficult as well. Yeah. But the prize would be avoiding these tariffs that are going to have a real material impact on the economy.
Which could, yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it? I mean, Beth was just laying it out there, a nightmare for the government. I can see you nodding your head. I mean, what do you think of how Keir Starmer's acted so far?
I think he's played it well, to be honest. I think, you know, there's been a lot of people who've been firing off shots from the EU as well. So obviously we've got Mark Carney, he's got an election 23rd of April. He's obviously trying to get a Trump bounce out of being tough on that. But I think Starmer's actually played it really well. It is really difficult, but in some ways, even if we are included in these tariffs tomorrow on Liberation Day, as Beth outlined, it's not over till it's over. We know that Trump has got previous in terms of saying things, and it's announced, and then pulling back. So I think in that sense, while, you know, people are being mindful of that, I'm sure Starmer and his team are, there's still everything to play for. But, you know, it's right, you can't sugarcoat it. If we are affected by these tariffs, that's just another thing for the government and Rachel Reeves to think about. But actually, even if we do get a deal, we could still get caught up in a global trade war and have impacts from that hitting us as well. So it is really tough. I mean, we all know Trump. His one message to Americans is, we want stuff made in America. We want a deal for American goods. And weirdly, in a way, that's sort of what, in a different way, Starmer wants as well. He wants growth. He wants more manufacturing in this country. As Trump's got a different way of going about it.
Ed?
Well, I mean, it's a very complex and difficult situation. Nobody wants a trade war. Nobody believes that, you know, any kind of tariff policy is going to boost the American economy or make American consumers better off. It's going to make them worse off. There are some silver linings to all this from a British perspective. First of all, it's not accompanied by the kind of rhetoric that is accompanied with the assault on Canada, for example, or the prospect of invading Greenland. So,
we're not being invaded. I mean, is that the line?
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
like good news.
Cling
Not
on,
saying
cling
it
on
was
to
about to
small
invade
mercy.
the UK.
We have
It
not
feels
yet
like that's
been
quite a low bar.
We've not been
of
invaded. The point I'm making is that Mark Carney has got to get himself into a kind of man-to-man match with Trump. You know, I'm going to stand up to Trump because basically Trump has said, oh, I might invade Canada. Keir Starmer doesn't need to do that. He can slightly roll with that. So that's point number one. Secondly, weirdly, trade wars can provide opportunities or trade skirmishes, as I saw it described in the FT today, which is, you know, if you take on Mexico and Canada, there might actually be room for British manufacturers to benefit from that. And the third thing is, weirdly, we are predominantly a service economy, and although America is our largest trading partner, as a single nation trading partner, a lot of that is services, so they will be free from tariffs. So it's not all doom and gloom, but the big macro picture is it's total uncertainty, it's insane economic policy, and nobody is going to be a winner from this.
Just to pick up on Ed's point, there is sort of a glimmer of hope for the government. Like, number one, Caroline, you're right, none of it might happen, or he might announce it and then delay the implementation, but also the UK could benefit from some carve-outs. So if Keir Starmer can really leverage this relationship he's built with Trump, leverage the fact that we don't have a big trade deficit with the US, and we're actually not one of these countries that are exporting more than importing, and get some carve-outs, it could actually be good for British business, because what happens is companies then settle in the UK to export to US because we have more favourable tariff environment. So there is actually a way this could go that could play out much more beneficially for the UK government, but it is so uncertain at a time when things are tough for people. I mean, you know, we're talking about tariffs, but people at home, everyone's seen their bills go up. Everyone's feeling the cost of living crisis still, and then much more macro uncertainty.
How much do you think that would be worrying them at number 10?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, energy prices have gone up. I think the average bill's £110 a year. Water bill's gone up, I think, average about £10 a month. And then, of course, council tax in England, I think, is averaging at 5%. In Scotland, I think it could be 8% plus. In Wales, anything between 5 and 9%. So everyone's feeling that. Yes, there is good news today that, you know, millions of people will get a national minimum wage increase. But again, we've got to see how things play through in terms of the employers' national insurance tax rise as well. It is difficult times here. And, of course, announced recently in the spring statement, big cuts happening, which are very not popular with the Labour benches, some of them on the Labour benches in particular in terms of benefit cuts. And a lot of the growth stuff is for the medium long term. It's not something people can feel and smell now that is going to change their economic prospects.
Thanks all very much. Well done, Ed, for staying on the chair. You've done well. That's good. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The Home Secretary announces new measures against Russia and accuses the Kremlin of unacceptable threats to our national security. Stay with us.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope, because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News.
There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the Bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Talbot?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion. We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Hello, welcome back. Well, I've come out to the Skypad, our new bit of kit, quite exciting, to speak to our very own chief political correspondent, John Craig.
An old bit of kit.
Love it. We've been told today that Russia is being put on the top level of a new registration scheme that's supposed to try and protect the UK from what it's calling malign foreign influence. So, John, what's going on?
Well, there's Vladimir Putin. What the government's talking about today is a new crackdown on the Kremlin. Now, they've tried sanctions, expulsions of diplomats and so on, various measures. Today, they have made this announcement. Yes, a foreign influence registration scheme. What does that mean? Dreadful piece of jargon. Sounds like a bit of red tape and bureaucracy. What it really is, the government is saying that anyone who works for the Russian state is going to have to register and declare what their activities are. If they don't do that, they can go to jail for 5 years. It already applies to Iran. It was announced today in the House of Commons by Dan Jarvis. He's one of the ministers named there. There's Dan Jarvis, the security minister, rising star, tipped as perhaps a future defence secretary. He was talking today about Russia posing what he called an acute threat to UK national security. This was Dan Jarvis speaking in the Commons.
What we're trying to do here, through the use of FIRS and through other means and mechanisms, is to ensure that the UK is as hard a target as possible to make it the most challenging operating environment for those who would do us harm.
Do us harm. Well, the Tories said, yes, good, all well and good, but what about China? Chris Philps, the Shadow Home Secretary, mentioned it, as did China hawks like Ian Duncan Smith and others. Now, some of the MPs raised this. Know what that building is? It's the Royal Mint.
I'm glad you came in there, because I actually didn't know.
It's the old Royal Mint near the Tower of London,
right, okay.
in central London. And the Chinese have bought it. In 2018, they paid £255 million for that site to turn it into a big super embassy. Now, there's been a huge row locally. Tower Hamlets Council have twice said no to planning permission. There's all sorts of concerns about demos outside, pro-Hong Kong protesters and so on. It's also claimed there's a lot of secret cables go underneath between Canary Wharf and government departments. That's another argument. Now, the complaint is that it shouldn't go ahead, according to the critics of China, but it's Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, has in the jargon called it in, taken the decision away from Tower Hamlets, and it's thought the government is minded to give the go-ahead. Well, that was opposed today, among others, by Sir Julian Lewis, familiar face, used to chair the Security and Intelligence Committee. This is what he had to say.
Can he take the message back to the government that the House's concern about building the biggest Chinese communist embassy, in fact the biggest embassy in Western Europe, in London, it's not clear why the government needed to call it in on security grounds, given that the local authority wanted to refuse permission completely.
So that's Tower Hamlets he's talking about there in East London. So, a lot of talk about China, when really what the government wanted to talk about was getting tough with Russia, crack down on the Kremlin. There's a thoughtful, pensive-looking Vladimir Putin. He must be laughing at the fact that whilst the government's talking tough about Russia, Tory MPs are saying, what about China?
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? I mean, in a way, this is the thing that everyone can kind of unite behind in the House of Commons, getting tough on the Kremlin. China much more complex.
Of course, Dan Jarvin mentioned the Ukraine invasion as well as the threat to our security here. So, yes, public enemy number one, but other public enemy, of course, is China, according to many MPs in Parliament.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there on the Skypad. Now, we will be getting the thoughts of Ed and Caroline on all of this in just a moment. Very interesting to see what they have to say. I caught that, Ed, just a little in your pocket then, but never mind. We'll let you off. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back. Well, we've just been hearing about new measures to classify Russia on a list of nations that pose a risk to the safety of the UK's interests. We can bring back in Ed Vaizey and Caroline Flint to discuss this more. I mean, look, Russia in some ways is one part of it, but the interesting conversation is really around China, because we have heard some Conservative shadow ministers and backbenchers coming out saying they want tougher action on China. Ed, what do you think about this?
I've never really understood the kind of get China mentality, which started, and it followed to a certain extent Donald Trump. Trump won when the new Trump presidency, the first Trump presidency, made kind of China enemy number one, and the Biden administration followed. And you could understand the American perspective. It was basically a trade war by other means, and the UK, as a close ally of the US, was forced to follow suit. So the pivot from the Cameron-Osborne days. I've never really subscribed to it. China is a major power. It's the second richest nation on earth. We trade with it. The phone that you saw me putting away just before the advert break was made in China. It's an iPhone, but it's made in China, and nobody, bats an eyelid at that. So the fact that we're having this kind of bizarre row, I mean, there may be lots of things wrong with the Chinese embassy. It may be too big. It may crowd out the Tower of London, very important heritage site. But the idea that the second most important country in the world, if I can put it that way, slightly oddly, can't build an embassy and create presumably jobs and construction in our capital city, this is somehow a terrible threat to our national security. I can't see what the argument is.
Caroline, what's your take on this?
Well, I think Russia and China have a different way of working, and clearly, you know, we've got a situation at the moment with Russia has literally created a war with Ukraine, which we aren't having to do, and that's in Europe, and everything that goes with that. But I think, again, you know, when I was on the Intelligence Security Committee, I think we did some work looking at in terms of Chinese influence, and I think it might have been completed after the 2019 election by the then committee that carried it on. And there were some examples, I think, of influencing, undue influencing. We had situations, didn't we, where I think MPs were getting caught up in meeting people of Chinese origin who were connected to the state and all of that. And that's why I think this foreign influence register scheme, FIRS, is partly to deal with the fact, whether it's, you know, Russia or China or others, foreign influences, and how we need to make sure that that is sub-registered. Partly, you know, it would help politicians to know if they could look at a register who they might be meeting. I'm not sure how successful it will be, but I think it's one step to open up how operators working with states with whom we do have security concerns need to be flushed out and to be held account.
I mean, this legislation was passed by the last Tory government. It's not politically controversial in any shape or form, and it's similar to a lot of US legislation that's existed for years, and it also included, for example, long overdue measures to allow the government to intervene in foreign takeovers. So if a company is being, say, taken over by a Chinese company, the UK government would have a say. Does this threaten our security? All of that is fine, and I've no doubt at all that the Chinese do get up to no good. I've no doubt, obviously, the Russians, we know, get up to terrible things on our soil.
Bulgarians acting on their behalf.
Dare I say it, we get up to no good in other states. I mean, everyone spies on everybody else. I think it's this singling out. It's this singling out of China that anything anyone Chinese does in the UK has to be suspect. I think is sort of going over the top.
OK, really interesting debate to be had. Thanks both very much indeed. Now, what happens when someone who is autistic, disabled and vulnerable comes face to face with a social care system that's been in crisis for years? Successive governments have promised reform. Will it be any different this time? Sky's People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has been following one young woman's story.
So at 11 o'clock at night, I'll be on the streets, and this is serious now, this is serious.
Chloe Layton's life is spiralling out of control. She's disabled, autistic, homeless, and right now she's panicking.
At the moment, I don't have anywhere to go.
She's pleading with a social worker to find her a place to stay, crammed into a disabled toilet in a pub, recording this conversation because she doesn't trust anyone anymore. Then the social worker on the other end of the line says this. Chloe is on her own. In just a few months, Chloe's life has gone from happy and stable to dangerously unpredictable. It all started last November when Chloe's father suffered a really serious stroke. With no one else to care for her, her local authority, Buckinghamshire Council, had a legal obligation to find emergency accommodation and suitable social care for her. Except she says that hasn't happened.
When Dad had his stroke, they don't care. Dad would keep me safe from all these people. He was the barrier. I'm too bright, but I'm not bright enough without help. And so nobody knows what to do with me, and I fall through the gaps.
Where are you staying tonight?
I don't know.
The council's been paying for Chloe to stay in hotels, but they've stopped paying now after they offered her some temporary accommodation. Chloe refused that accommodation. She says it's not suitable for someone with her disabilities. The law says that accommodation must be suitable for Chloe's needs, but if she refuses somewhere, the council doesn't have to do any more to house her, but it still can support her. I'm heading out of town to the temporary accommodation that the council have offered Chloe. And actually, looking at the map, it's a good 20-minute drive outside of the town, and it looks pretty remote. Buckinghamshire Council told us, we stand by the actions of our staff and as an organisation in regard to the content featured in this piece. We take our duty of care extremely seriously in regard to any resident who presents to us with a housing and/or social care need and follow process and procedures rigorously and to the letter. For the next few days, Chloe's friends and family help to pay for hotel accommodation. But then things take a turn for the worst.
There's no money left, so we're just stuck. I'm going to try and stay in the pub till 11 o'clock, and then that's it, I'm on the street.
So we've been getting regular messages from Chloe for the last few hours, and she's been getting more and more desperate as time goes on. So I'm going to go and see her and see just exactly what's happening.
Ooh, it's cold.
Chloe, it's Nick. So what is going on?
It's been a long day. It's been lots of crying. They said that because I won't go to the hostel that that's it. So I don't know what to do. I've never been like this, so I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
It's now 11 p.m.
I think we are going to have to call some police officers to come and chat with you. Oh, hello, I wonder if you can help me.
Oh, thank you.
By now, both the police and council are aware that we are here filming. Chloe's phone lights up again. After weeks of resisting, the council has offered Chloe an alternative. Buckinghamshire Council uses this hotel as emergency temporary accommodation, but straight away there's a problem.
So I can't get through the doors.
For months now, Chloe has been scared that her basic needs won't be met, and she's been told to accept what's on offer and move forward. And now she has. The room isn't wheelchair accessible. She can't go to the toilet here or anywhere else in the hotel. Her basic needs aren't being met. It's 3 a.m. Our few days with Chloe Layton reveals a complicated story. It's about what happens when someone with complex needs comes face to face with a social care system that's chronically underfunded. Understanding autism requires time, resources, money, something councils don't have. And for Chloe, it's about trying to find some calm amid the chaos so she can live her life.
When Nick's come in to join me, Ed and Caroline, and it's been quite interesting watching this with two former MPs and the kind of experiences that you bring to that. Because Caroline, you were saying how you sort of almost seen the fault lines between people who need help and the services like the council or whatever that are supposed to be providing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Ed's had the same experience. I mean, weirdly, in a way, you know, one of the powers of an MP is to try and get an answer to a question or unravel a particular problem where all sides it's broken down completely. And I can think of, you know, a number of cases over the years, some very similar to this, where being able to step in, at least try to be, dare I say it, an honest broker, can help to shift things and get people to focus on what we can do rather than what we can't do. But as you put in your report, Nick, these are difficult circumstances because actually we haven't got enough support available for young women like Chloe and many others.
I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to make this so often when we do stories, they're sometimes pretty clear cut. You can normally see which side the viewer is going to come down on. One of the reasons why we wanted to tell this story is because of its complexity. You have somebody like Chloe with extra needs. She communicates a lot. She sends a lot of messages. You have a council which, to be fair on Buckinghamshire Council, were trying their best, like most councils, under an enormous amount of pressure to provide social care and housing. And somewhere in the middle, it breaks down. And when Chloe emailed our team 2 or 3 weeks ago, we read it, and I just felt like she was in the middle of multiple crises. Social care, which we know, you guys have known for generations, it's been struggling. Housing, temporary housing in particular, is very difficult to come by. And when you enter crisis, it's very difficult to find suitable accommodation. And I'll just not forget at 3 a.m. when Chloe did find the accommodation, she couldn't use the toilet. Her basic needs weren't met. And so we did feel like we wanted to tell this story, but we acknowledged that it's not black and white. And at some point, when an individual comes in touch with the council, it can fail.
Social care, it feels like we're always talking about it in Westminster and everyone's saying it's really bad and something needs to be done about it. Why is it, do you think, that it's just been so
It's very difficult. I mean, look, I agree with Nick that, you know, we've got to remember the people working in the council do a very, very tough job, and it can be kind of soul-destroying because you're dealing with people, the most vulnerable people, day in, day out, and we should never forget the people who are trying to help them are affected by that as well. And I always felt as an MP, funny enough, the cases I found the most difficult and frustrating were parents who had kids with special needs, because what I felt very strongly was that each parent was trying to reinvent the wheel. Yeah. It was almost like, it felt, whenever somebody came to me as a constituency MP, it almost felt like they were the first people ever to approach the council with a child who had special needs, and could the council help? And so I was always perplexed, I guess, that there weren't sort of protocols and systems to make the whole process as smooth as possible. Now, obviously, every case is difficult. The case with Chloe, I don't know the background. It struck me as a kind of emergency that had sort of suddenly arrived after a slow burn. It reminds you how important families are. Again, we talk often, perhaps not enough, about unpaid carers. You know, Chloe's father obviously doing a job that meant that the council didn't have to step in for many years. So all of those networks are so important. But it just struck me that it's always struck me as an MP. Why does it always feel like it's the first time? It shouldn't.
Exactly. Can you cover a lot of
And I think, you know, over the years we've done stories on special educational needs, the huge rate of absence in school, support for families, all of these social care issues. I think what Chloe's story reminds us is the urgency for reform. And we've been talking about reform for a long time. We've got the Casey review coming up in the next few years, which is not the first review we've had. The last one in 2011, Andrew Dilnot's report basically suggested we need to fund social care better. And that's probably what Louise Casey will say. But I think the timings are interesting. Louise Casey will come back with a report towards the end of this Parliament, just as the electorate will want to know, well, how do we solve social care? And there is a concern that those big, difficult issues about who pays and how much will be kicked into the long grass for the next
government
election.
has to work out how to pay for it.
And Chloe's case shows us just how urgently people, not just Chloe, but others, need help.
There has to be a solution that brings the parties together. I mean, I have to say, you know, Liz Kendall, myself and Norman Lamb actually was urging a more cross-party approach to some of this. But I think what's really important about Nick's film as well, it's just to remind us that when we talk about social care, it is about those people of advanced years, over 70, over 80, over 90, clocking on for 100 these days. But it's also about a huge swathe of young adults whose parents, as you said, Ed, have been really doing the job for years. But then a crisis comes and there's no headroom.
But it's also about, you know, that sort of weird paradox. You need regulations and legislation to make sure that there is a support net, but it is often the case that the regulations and so on take away a degree of autonomy from local authorities. And you can hear in the way that Nick was talking about his report, you know, at some point, you know, when Chloe refuses accommodation, that triggers an end to payments, or the council is able to discharge its responsibility. It's all about complying, as it were, with the letter of the law. And there's too much compliance with that and not with the spirit of the law. And there's a lack of flexibility that, weirdly, these regulations bring about, which, if we could find some way of bringing that back, and a lot of it does come down to local leadership as well. You can have, just as you can have a brilliant head teacher, you can have a brilliant head of social services who can run a transformatory service.
And of course, and also often, you know, but for a lot of people in these circumstances, they're often dealing with more than one agency. And, you know, part of it is an alliance of the willing. But at the end of the day, there is a cash issue here. I mean, councils are spending a hell of a lot of money on special educational needs. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it then has an impact on other services. Council taxes are going up,
That's interesting,
as from today. But truth is, it is not enough to deal with this problem. That's why the Louise Casey, hopefully, will come back with something we can politically, across the divides, agree on.
Genuinely really interesting discussion. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, on a slightly different note, social media isn't having a great run at the minute, but the Labour Growth Group of 110 MPs have been told they should take on toxic messages and misinformation online. The message to these Labour backbenchers: get on TikTok and YouTube to challenge toxic narratives in the hope that some of them can become online influencers. What could possibly go wrong?
UK, we're giving millions of people a pay rise.
Labour can't fix our economy because they don't know where growth comes from. Only Conservatives can fix our economy.
So this is it. My first tattoo. You wait till you see it. It's going to be mega. Vote reform. My first tattoo. Let's go for it.
Because it's all about the family and it's all about the boom. That's what we do. We bring the boom. We bring the boom to you.
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
I thought we weren't allowed to be on TikTok. I thought it was the Chinese influencers. What's going on? We're going to, you know, we're not having the embassy, but we're going to let everyone, all our MPs go on TikTok. All right, okay.
How are your socials? Are you guys partial to a little cheeky, video, or are you...
I'm rubbish on socials now. I just barely am on Twitter. I mean...
Yeah, I do Instagram, but it's a private account.
That doesn't count.
With my dry sense of humour. And I do LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the new Twitter.
The secret Ed Vaizey video.
We need to get an invite to it.
LinkedIn is the new Twitter.
Should we I'm going to try and follow you on Instagram now and see if you let me in.
I will dismiss your application.
Brutal. That was
Power
brutal.
mad Vaizey.
But it's so boring, this social media stuff, isn't it? I mean, everyone says AI is going to take your job. I mean, social media means MPs now have to employ about 25 people just to cover all the social media accounts.
But it works, though, doesn't it? Doesn't it work?
It does. I think Caroline said while we were watching the VT, it's about authenticity. Farage works not because he's got a better social media person. He works because he is who he is. Now, whether you like him or you don't like him, he's Nigel Farage and he's compelling. Just as, dare I say it, Boris would have worked if he'd carried on. And if he comes back, he works on social media.
If he comes back, that was a bit of a...
People want to see his stuff.
Is that a
People want to see his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is all about authenticity, and if it's too scripted, it's not going to come.
Yeah, it really doesn't work.
They'll all do them anyway. They'll have to do them, but the ones that really break through have to have that sense of, taking the mickey out of themselves, authenticity, and being a bit edgy, I suppose.
Do you put Ed Davey in that category?
I think, actually, to be fair to Ed Davey, who I've always found not as... I've seen a surprising side to him, I never found him particularly full of humour. But actually, the truth is in the last general election campaign, he went for that.
Yeah.
He went for the
I don't think it made any
videos
difference.
thing.
I think the Lib Dems would have won big anyway because people just wanted to turf
but it helped
the Tories
his persona.
out.
People were talking about it.
I mean, there was a very rude tweet from Robert Jenrick today saying, "Who is this oaf? Ed Davey, we got serious issues to discuss." Because he was going around with one of those handheld horses, jumping
the hobby
over
horse,
things.
yeah. Not just a two-horse race, I think. It was a message, the local election message there.
But he leans into it in his own way to create his own little buzz around that.
He got people talking about it.
You did get people talking, and his recognition factor probably went up quite a lot, I would imagine.
Yeah. Thanks very much, indeed, both of you. Although I should be thanking you since you just said that you're going to refuse my attempt to befriend you on Instagram, but never mind, we'll see.
Just apply, Sophie, and see what happens.
OK, thanks. I'll update you. Thanks very much indeed. Great to have you with us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Marbuck Bear, and then at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yalda Hakeem. We'll see you right here tomorrow at 7.